All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Coach podcast. I'm your host, Micheal Pacheco, and today with me, I have David Galowich. David is the founder of Terra, Firma Leadership, chairman of 2 Vistage advisory boards for chief executives and business owners, and a leadership coach for high-performing leaders and teams with Bravanti. David, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you. I like to start at the podcast, inviting our guests to just kind of speak a little bit about yourself. Tell us who you are, what got you into coaching.
Yeah, thank you. So, what really got me into coaching was a long time ago when I was in college. I was on the college crew team, and I had a couple of coaches who really were great examples of what coaching should be and what it's all about. That was in an athletic sense. But I also, at the same time, thought I wanted to be a biomedical engineer. First semester of college wasn't very friendly. I was having a lot of fun on the crew team. I was in a state with an 18-year-old drinking age and, having a lot of fun. And my grades weren't that great. But I had one class that was really interesting. It was a communication arts class, and it was on communication and human behavior. And it sort of took me in a different path. It sort of veered me away from the biomedical engineering and sort of got me focused a little bit on, the way people communicate. That let me on a little bit of a journey through college. I ended up double majoring in psychology and communication arts and looking at things like, the psychology of communication and how communication happens in complex organizations. Took some really fun classes. Problem was 1982, I graduated college. The interest rates were in the high double digits, and the high teens, I'm sorry. And, it's just not a friendly place to find a job in 1982. So I ended up taking a right turn, panicking, thinking I wasn't going to get a job in this organizational development space, and went to law school. It ended up serving me well. I had a nice business career that spanned about a couple of decades. But what I realized is throughout all of the success that we had in business, in the organizations I was involved in, it was really all that stuff I studied back in college I was putting into practice. And it was all the stuff about organizational development that was really it. So got to a point where I was in my mid-50s and had to decide what I wanted to do when I grow up. And had a good exit out of a couple of businesses and decided to just devote the rest of my time to helping develop leaders. Went back and got some additional credentials, went back to Georgetown, I think it was probably 2015-ish, and got some credentials for leadership coaching and launched a leadership development business in 2016.
Love it. And is this, are we decided, is this what you want to be when you grow up?
I think so. I'm having an absolute blast. And, it's interesting. My practice changes slightly from time to time as I see different things that interest me. But overall, yeah, this is where I want to be. This is what I'm really enjoying.
Love it. Love it. Who do you work with? Who's your ideal client?
So, as you mentioned, I have 2 Vistage groups. Vistage is a peer-to-peer organization that's been around for 60 years. And we have, I think over 26,500 members now internationally. When you join a Vistage group, you join a group that's led by a professional chair. That's what I do is I chair the group. And they act as an independent advisory board for each other. So I have 30 members between my 2 Vistage groups. And that's something I really enjoy doing, and is working with people in the C-suite, mostly CEOs, business owners, and presidents, and helping them solve complex problems and helping them build their teams and lead high-performing teams. That's probably 2/3 of the work I do in any given month, is leading the Vistage groups. The other third of it is that, I'm fortunate through my association with Bravanti to be able to work with other high-performing leaders in really large organizations and do individual coaching, and then also do team optimization projects where we'll go in and work with a leadership team to, basically make sure they're as high-performing as possible.
So can you tell us a little bit about Vistage? I think a lot of our viewers and our listeners, of course, we've heard of Vistage before, but maybe some of them are a little unsure about exactly how it works. Are you contracted through them to professionally chair these groups, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. To be a chair, you'll have to go through training with Vistage, and you'll have to be officially anointed a chair. And the way it works is, our members, when they join Vistage, they're really joining a small group. Even though I mentioned that we've got 26,500 members, 99% of their interactions are with the group that they join. So as I mentioned, I have 15 people in each group. My members agreed to spend a full day together every month. It's a bigger time commitment for them than a financial commitment. And the full day that we spend, I facilitate a board meeting where each member is expected to bring a major business decision they need to make in the next 30 days, an opportunity they want to capitalize on, an issue they're trying to solve. And we go around the room and one at a time work those issues. We also have other things that we do. Each member is responsible for hosting one meeting a year. So we'll do a deep dive into the host's business. That's usually a little deeper financial review, a little bit deeper dive into their org chart and who's doing what. And then, for several of the meetings, I also bring in outside speakers and do workshops on topics that may be of interest to the members. That's most of what Vistage involves. We did find a way to connect our 26,000 members through our website. Behind the firewall, they can get in. And we've got all sorts of networks that are industry networks and other types of networks where they can get a lot of value. But 90% of the value proposition is really the small group that they join. And then in between those monthly meetings, each member gets between an hour and a half and 2 hours of my time one-on-one. And I'll either work with them in a strict coaching standpoint one-on-one, or I'll work with them and their team. So sometimes I'll actually work with the CEO and his leadership team on optimizing the team.
That's great. That's great. And tell us a little bit about Bravanti as well. I think Bravanti is somewhat lesser known, I think, than Vistage.
Yeah, actually, it's an international organization. So it originally was called BPI Group. They were rebranded about a year and a half ago. And Bravanti does, in addition to executive coaching, they do outplacement and some other talent-related stuff. I'm really only involved on the executive coaching and team optimization end of Bravanti. But they're really, I think, the go-to for the Fortune 500 companies that are really serious about bringing in someone to do leadership coaching for their senior leaders. And it's been a nice relationship working with them.
Nice. And what does a typical engagement with you look like if someone joins your Vistage group, for example? Are they typically in there for a year? Is it kind of an in perpetuity kind of thing, or just until they feel like they've overcome something?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So with Vistage, they're there as long as they can sit, as long as they believe they're still getting value out of it. And generally, if I'm doing my job right and if the group's a good group, they're not leaving for a good chunk of time.
Sure.
Our average tenure across the membership of Vistage, last time I saw that they ran that number, was about 7.5 years.
Is that for your group specifically or for all of Vistage?
For all of Vistage across our 26,000 members.
Okay.
So, I only launched my groups 5.5 years ago, but I have several of my founding members that are still in the group.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's, the reason I lose members, one, either they're not willing to be vulnerable and show up and actually participate in a way they need to, or we've had a lot of really successful exits as well. People have sold their business and retired. So
that's great.
Generally, Vistage, they stay in as long as they're getting value out of it. And like I say, if I'm doing my job right, they're there for a long time. Contrast that with a typical coaching assignment. A typical coaching assignment outside of Vistage is usually a 6-month engagement.
Sure.
The difference between coaching and consulting from a purist standpoint is that as a coach, I'm trying to give them a skill set so that they can solve problems without me. Contrast that with a consultant, and I do consulting, so I don't want to speak poorly about consultants, but a consultant generally helicopters in, looks at a given fact situation, solves the problem for you, and helicopters out.
Yeah.
And then their hope is that the next time they have a problem, you're going to get called to helicopter back in, solve the problem. Well, coaching, if we do our job right, we're enabling people to use a skill set where they can solve problems without us in the future. So we work through, making them a better leader so they don't need to call the consultant each time they have a problem. They're able to actually solve those problems on their own.
Mm-hmm. That's great. What when you're working with your coachees, what kind of tactics? How do you help them overcome whatever issues they might be facing? I imagine you probably get a wide variety of things that different people need help with, depending on whatever it is they're struggling with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first part of it is data gathering. I don't have a curriculum. I don't show up and say, today we're going to talk about executive presence. Tomorrow we're going to talk about your communication style. And, third, we're going to, so I try not to do anything out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when I am being interviewed
Mm-hmm.
by the client to see whether they want to hire me as a coach, we try to identify the areas that they want to work on. And if they're not really clear about what it is that they want to work on, I'll tell people, you may not be ready for me, or you may not be a good fit for coaching, because you really need to get some clarity about what you want out of it. I do turn away a fair amount of people that contact me for coaching, and sometimes the big red flag is, well, I'm not sure why I need a coach, but my board of directors tells me I need a coach.
No boy, no.
When I hear that, it's like, I'm not sure this is somebody that I'm going to be able to work with. And I challenge them on that. The people that show up and they tell me, here's what I'm struggling with, or here's what I want to do better at. Then we're able to design a plan around that. And so, usually the first couple of sessions start out with some assessment of them. And an assessment doesn't have to be a test or a survey. The best assessment tool I've got are these two things mounted on the side of my head. And so for the people that are listening to this, those are my ears. And so the assessment that I need to do is really sort of digging deep into what their past is, what's been the hurdles that they haven't been able to get over, that they've been tripping on, and then try to unpack that and figure out then what success look like and how do we get them there.
Interesting. What is so you're digging into people's past. Are you looking at personal life, professional life, mix of both?
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything, absolutely. And so, I'm not a therapist, and I'm not there to solve past traumas. But a lot of the belief systems that we carry around with us and that inform our actions are as a result of past experiences.
100%.
And so sometimes unpacking that, I don't do a deep dive into family psychology, but I do early on in the intake process, I ask people a lot about what was your family like growing up? Did you engage in conflict, or were people not allowed to have conflict? Did you scream and yell when you had conflict, or did you have a calm discussion? And so just finding out some of that background is really helpful.
Yeah, I imagine that really can inform a lot of, almost, I imagine understanding more about someone's background can help inform your curriculum that you end up coming up with them when you're working with them. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, as we were talking on the pre-call, you're a new parent, right?
Yep.
One thing to remember as you're raising that child is, that child's from day one starting to pick up clues from you and your wife on how you're acting, how you treat people, how you talk to people, how you talk to them.
Yeah.
And that will inform a lot of their early development.
Yeah. Doing the best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all we do. Yeah, but like I said, there's no manual that we get. Here's the perfect way to do it.
Wouldn't that be nice?
So all we can do is do the best we can. Wouldn't it be nice? Yeah, absolutely. But Google hasn't figured that one out yet. They haven't come up with the algorithm of how to raise the perfect child, how to be the perfect human being.
Yeah. When someday they'll come up with some kind of algorithm. I'm certain.
Yep. I hope they don't. I mean, because that's part of the human condition that makes life so rich and enjoyable.
Sure.
If we were all robots programmed to be perfect and we had no flaws, we would live in a really different world. And I don't know that it would be quite as enjoyable as it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you completely. You mentioned that sometimes you'll come across someone who's, maybe one of their advisors recommended that they get coaching. And they're like, I don't know what I need help with, but my advisor said I should get a coach. And you'll tend to turn those people down. How important is engagement in the process of working with these, C-suite executives, business owners that you work with?
It's critical. And maybe just to reel some of that back, I don't always just turn them down when they say that, but it puts a flag up that I need to start querying them to see how open they're going to be to being in this process. So, a lot of people, I'd say the majority of people that approach me for coaching, someone has suggested that they get some coaching, but it's not always a remedial situation. Sometimes it's you want to do better. But I find the people that I get along with the best, they're already very high performing, and they're open to learning what they can do to do even better. Right? They don't have ego around them where the point they say, hey, I'm already doing great, I don't need your stuff. They're people that really are open to being introspective and to being a participant in the process and to being challenged.
There's another word that you mentioned earlier on that caught my ear, having myself being a business owner who's gone through coaching with a number of different coaches and coaching groups, is vulnerability. And you mentioned sometimes people in your groups, if they're not willing to be vulnerable and to come out and speak about their problems, what does that look like in a group coaching situation like you have, where you've got 15 business owners in each group? They've each got their own business. Their business has, in theory, right, some proprietary information. Do you guys sign NDAs for these groups? Is it just kind of a handshake contract? Yeah. Is it difficult for people to come out and be vulnerable in those situations?
So two answers. There are two parts to answer your question. The first one is, yes, we do require everybody to sign a confidentiality agreement. That's part of the application process for Vistage. We take that very seriously. What's said in the room stays in the room. There are people that they, for the most part, have a board of directors, a governance board that's required by the state that they're incorporated in. Sometimes they even have an advisory board, but they need a safe place to come talk about these things before they present it to their board. And this could be anywhere from publicly traded companies to companies that are considering going public, and it can be very delicate. So yeah, confidentiality is really key. But we work hard as a group in the Vistage groups to build trust so that people will be vulnerable with each other. We have a process that I use to onboard people. Every time a new member comes in the door, we sort of blow the whistle, do a timeout, and make sure everybody gets to know each other and know their backstory and all that sort of stuff to build trust before we even start conducting business that first day. Because vulnerability is really the secret sauce that makes all of this work.
Yep.
Huge Brene Brown fan. I mean, her TED Talk on vulnerability really rocked me when I first saw it. And just finished reading her new book last night. So
nice. I haven't read the new one.
That makes the world go round.
I haven't read the new book, but Dare to Lead is a favorite of mine. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Great book.
Yeah. Total aside, this has nothing to do with coaching, but I'm seeing the Michael Jordan picture that you have on your wall behind you. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And I've got some great experiences surrounding Michael, being here in Chicago. But there's a quote of his I use all the time with my clients, and that's talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships. And when I'm talking to executives, it's not about them. It's not about how great they are. It's about how good a team they can build. And it's those teams. And I think Michael really exemplified that. Even though he was a huge individual contributor, they would have never won 6 championships if he didn't help, build a team around him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. What sort of things, when you first started your coaching career, what sort of things did you struggle with at first? And how did you overcome those?
Yeah, good question. The biggest struggle for me was business development. And I can coach my way
Business
out of the paper
development for
bag if I
you,
need to.
or coaching on business
Yeah.
development?
So no, for me, for actually going out and actually finding clients and signing them up and closing the deal.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of guy who will sit and have conversations with anyone, but I am a terrible salesman. I will not pressure anyone to sign up for anything. I want them to raise their hand and say, well, will you work with me? Right.
Yeah, guilty.
Yeah. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's that business development piece that was the really hard part for me. There was a book that I read, and I'm struggling for the author's name, but I remember the title. It's The Prosperous Coach. And that really sort of changed my approach towards marketing my coaching practice. And if I remember the book correctly, he basically said, you don't need a website. You don't need a business card. You just need to sit down with people who've expressed an interest in coaching and say, how about I just coach you for an hour? You can see what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
And you give up the secret sauce for free for an hour. You walk them through a typical coaching session. And if you do your job right at the end of the hour, they probably had a few ahas.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at them and you say, that's what coaching's about. Would you like to engage in a coaching assignment with me?
Yeah.
And that was really a pivotal change. Sorry about that. For me is, because I was all busy trying to get the great website built and the really glamorous logo on the business card and all that sort of stuff, and trying to figure out how to, get LinkedIn to the point where I had people just reaching out to me. And then I realized I just had to go out and do it, show that I could do it well. And, success breeds more success. And so after I got a few clients under my belt, launched my Vistage group, just doing the right thing worked out well.
Yeah, that's great. The Prosperous Coach by Steve Chandler and Rich Litvin. Is that the one?
Yep.
We'll make sure to add that to the show notes. So if you guys want to check that out, it'll be listed there. So talk a little bit more about how you overcame that. You said you would offer free sessions, it sounds like, and just work with someone for an hour and then give away the secret sauce, just go all out. And did you struggle with scarcity mindset during that time? Like, maybe if I do one call
at the beginning, yes. Yeah. I mean, and the difference between a scarcity mindset and an abundance mindset, it took probably a solid year and a half or 2 years of trying to build that practice before I shifted to the abundance mindset. And mindset's important. It's something we talk about as a coach, but the old shoemaker's kids go shoeless, right? So you got to put it into practice yourself. Part of integrity, you got to, not just talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And I was pretty fortunate that quickly I was able to shift from having to actually mine for business to just having referrals that are inbound. And so I was pretty fortunate that once I got those handful of clients, under wing and things were going well, I really didn't have to do much marketing. Things just started coming inbound.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you use that analogy as well. I use that one frequently. The cobbler's kids have no shoes.
Right. Absolutely.
That's funny. Talk about some wins that you've had. Give us some examples of some people that you've worked, some leaders that you've worked with, and you've helped them get over some kind of hump or either break through or get around a big brick wall, some kind of struggle that they've worked on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we take client confidentiality very seriously, but,
Sure.
To give you some really generic examples, and sorry if I'm being a little cagey about it, but
no, I get it. Let's talk about Bob.
Let's
talk about a guy named Bob.
Yeah, let's talk about Bob. I'll tell you that there have been multiple Bobs that were just in the weeds. Their work-life balance was terrible. They weren't getting the results at work they wanted. And at the end of the day, what it really was is they didn't have the right people around them. And once I was able to either help them understand how to properly engage the right people, if they did have the right people there, or bring in the right people, put them in the right seats and empower them, all of a sudden their life became relatively easy. They started freeing up a lot of time. They started getting The organization started getting better results. They personally started getting better results. They started having better family lives. And a lot of that it really isn't them being smarter than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's them surrounding themselves with the right people, empowering those people, but also holding them accountable, putting the boundaries around them and giving them the safeguards they need to stay accountable to the organization. And I'll tell you, that's a formula that has worked extremely well for me and my clients. And, I would probably say that of the several thousand hours I've done of coaching, there are now hundreds of clients
Mm-hmm.
who that's worked very well for. And they've realized they didn't have to be smarter than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to be working harder than anyone else. They just had to have the right people on the bus, be vulnerable with them, trust them, learn how to engage in productive candor and conflict with them,
Mm-hmm.
be clear on their commitments, make sure that people are bought in, hold them accountable, and then give them a yardstick that they can measure themselves by so they knew how they were doing.
Yeah. So in this context, are you talking about helping these Bobs hire the right people to to hire the right people in the right seats?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The first thing I want them to do is figure out, do they have people that have values that align with theirs and with their organizational values?
Mm-hmm.
Because even before you look at is the person in the right seat, you want to say, is it the right person?
That's a
And
culture
so,
fit.
yeah, absolutely. So you need to first see, is this a person who should be on the bus in any seat to start with? Once you determine that, this is a person who's got values that are shared with me and my organization, then you have to look at them and say, now, are they in the right seat?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times we'll talk about, what are the skill sets of the person? What is their wiring from a communication standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
What are their skills? And then figure out, maybe they're a great person, they're just in the wrong seat, and that's why you're not getting the right results. So we'll go down that path. And then once you've got the right people, once you got them in the right seats, then it's a matter of doing what, Bravanti and I would call team optimization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a matter of trying to make sure that the team understands how to work with each other. And I lean pretty heavily on Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions framework
Okay.
for that. So Patrick Lencioni wrote a book that a while back that is just an absolutely fantastic book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Okay.
I love his framework. The only issue I take with it is the word dysfunctions has a negative connotation. So when I talk to teams, sometimes, why are we reading this book? Are we really broken? No, you're not broken. We're just trying to make you a more high-performing team.
Mm-hmm.
So when I tend to do team optimization work, as opposed to calling it the 5 dysfunctions, I tend to tell them I want to look at the 5 behaviors of high-performing teams.
Mm-hmm.
And those behaviors were things I just recited a few minutes ago. If you think of it as a pyramid, that's what Lencioni likes to display it on, as sort of a pyramid. The base of the pyramid, the first behavior of a high-performing team is trust. And it's that vulnerability-based trust that we were talking about. So, can you look at someone on your team and say, hey, you're better at this than I am. Can you help me?
Mm-hmm.
Or can you look at someone and say, hey, I blew that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get it fixed. So, the whole thing is, can you be safe, psychologically safe, and know that in this organization, you're not going to get a knife in your back when you least expect it.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming you've got that first behavior of a very vulnerable, trusting team, the next thing you need on top of that is you need them to have really candid conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You need, and Lencioni calls it productive conflict. Again, the only twist I like to put on that is, instead of conflict being a negative word, I like to tell them you need really, candid conversations. I take a little more of the Kim Scott way of having radical candor.
Mm-hmm.
You can only have that kind of candor, though, if you trust each other and if you know you're not going to get a knife in the back. So at that point, we'll find a team that trusts each other. They can have really candid conversations. Now they can be really clear about what they're working towards. They can have a good, clear commitment. They're only going to have that commitment and get buy-in from everyone if they've all had a chance to say their piece on things. They disagree. They had to be able to, put their voice in there. They're only going to do that if they trust each other. So you can see how this builds like building blocks on top of each other.
Yeah.
You get to a point where they really are clear about what the commitment is that they're agreeing to, and they all buy in. Then the next piece is they need to hold each other accountable. So you need to make sure that accountability is happening. And accountability in this framework is not a manager holding one of their reports accountable. It's really, well, peers hold each other accountable. Because when you look at the social science and the data on it, it's really clear that people are more worried about letting a peer down than they are letting their own manager down. And so if you can have that peer-to-peer accountability, it really leads to great results. And the last piece is just an attention to results in Lencioni's world. And, you know, for me, that's getting past status and the ego and making sure that people have a good scorecard, know what the KPIs are that they're being measured by. And that's how you're going to get the results.
Yeah, fascinating. I wonder, can you tell us, and maybe you can't, can you tell us more about the psychology of not wanting to let your peers down, but with your supervisor or with a superior, you're not as concerned about it. That fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of science out there, and I can't exactly tell you the author, chapter, and verse right now, but you know, I think if you look, you'll find that as human beings, we're just social animals, and it's that social peer pressure that really makes us want to perform more so than, oh God, my boss is telling me I got to get this report done. I can't make any mistakes, right? You're letting your team down. As opposed to letting your boss down, and it's more important not to let your team down.
That tracks. I mean, that just by itself, yeah, because it's kind of, your teammates are looking out for you. They got your back, and you don't want to let them down for that reason. Yeah,
absolutely.
There's a couple books that I have read. It's been a couple years, but I wonder if they might not be appropriate for this conversation. There's one by Susan Scott called Fierce Conversations.
Fierce Conversations. Susan Scott used to be a Vistage chair.
Okay, there you go.
There you go. So Vistage, again, in the modern world, it rebranded itself maybe 8 or 10 years ago. If you look in the foreword to her book, she talks about being a tech chair. Tech was the original name of Vistage before it was rebranded.
Okay.
But excellent book. Yeah, I used the book. In fact, when I onboard my Vistage members, depending on what I've learned from them in the initial interviews before they agree to join the group, I usually give them a book as part of the onboarding process. And Fierce Conversations is one of my go-tos that I give people.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Another one that I like is called Crucial Conversations. And that one is, let's see, who's the author? Joseph Grinny is the author of that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another great book.
Yeah. So let's see what else.
You know, and if you're talking about, you know, just conversational intelligence and good books, God, it's called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. Wish we take a pause. I go grab the book out of the closet, but Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. Excellent book. And again, it just leads to great conversational competence.
Marilee Adams and Marshall Goldsmith.
Yep, there you go.
So,
and then also Craig Weber, I believe, has a couple books on conversational capacity. I've had Craig in to speak to my Vistage group. He's an excellent authority on the topic.
Nice. That one I'm not familiar with. I'll have to, conversational capacity, I'll have to check that one out. David, would you share with us some of your struggles, where like maybe a situation where maybe you've just screwed up and learned something super valuable from it?
Oh boy, where do I start?
This is where you got to be vulnerable. You got to eat your own dog food.
Exactly. You know, I'll tell you the biggest struggles. Probably, you know, we go back to the conversation we had in the pre-call, raising kids. That's where I've learned the most.
Okay.
Right? My kids are now 24 and soon to be 26. And, you know, what I've learned, those conversations are the ones that I've learned that I need to focus on and do better every day.
I love it. I'll take that one to heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, you can't break them. You know, kids are great. They're very resilient. But when you make a mistake, own it And when you learn a life lesson, share it with them.
Sure.
And be vulnerable. And I've had to do that with my own kids multiple times. And as a result, I knock on wood, I think I have a great relationship with my children.
Yeah.
But there was a few bumps in the road along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. David, is there anything else that you'd like to chat about that we haven't touched on yet?
Boy, I think we've done a pretty deep dive into coaching and my practice. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you on it.
Okay, great. Well, David, share with us, where can our viewers and listeners connect with you online?
Yeah, the easiest place to find me is LinkedIn. And so I'm just David Galowich, Galowich. From there, you can also find in my contact information there a link to my website. My website is Terra Firma Leadership, TerraFirma leadership.com. Those are definitely the easiest places to find me. And one thing we haven't touched on is the name Terra Firma, and the reason I named my company that. And I think really to be great leaders, you need to be standing on solid ground. And so that's where I came up with the name Terra Firma. And I think people need to be grounded in their actions. They need to feel like they're on solid ground. And so I like to take them back to that place.
I have to point out, I love the juxtaposition between Terra Firma leadership and the picture of Michael Jordan's wingspan photo. Michael Air Jordan in the wingspan photo in the background. That's a great juxtaposition. And I don't think they're, obviously they're not mutually exclusive. But it's a great juxtaposition. I love that. David Galowich, thank you so much for joining us on the Remarkable Coach podcast. And thank you to our listeners and viewers for hanging out with us as well. We'll see you all next time. Cheers.
Hey, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, David.